chapter of the late great planet Earth is entitled Future Tense, focuses primarily on the then developing general interest in astrology and astrologers and the practice of divining the future. Even back then, there was a growing sense that time was beginning to run short. There was a sudden explosion of cults and cult leaders who rushed to capitalize on the vague sense of unease that was beginning to make itself felt. Over the ensuing decades, that sense of unease, if not substance, the secular world recognized it and, like the cults and cult leaders, sought to capitalize on it. One would think that that would result in people flocking to churches to get saved. Instead, movies like the Omen trilogy and Mad Max were among the first in an entire new genre of religiously inspired doomsday movies. There are new doomsday-themed movies coming out every season, desensitizing their audiences to the internal God-given warning bell that the clock is running out. In 1969, the foreseeable future didn't look all that rosy. But in 1969, there was a foreseeable future. The furthest Hollywood appears ready to speculate into the foreseeable future from this vantage point on the timeline was in last year's doomsday movie, 2012. In 1969, the U.S. national debt as a percentage of GDP was practically non-existent. America's credit rating was AAA, as it had always been. In 1969, what had college campuses stirred up was the Vietnam War and the military-industrial complex. At more than $350 billion, the U.S. national debt wasn't even on the radar. That was the national debt, not the deficit, which in 1969 was at 0%. Remember, the debt is the total amount we owe our creditors. The deficit is how much our bank account is currently overdrawn. Today, the year's deficit, that is how much we're overdrawn, stands at $1.4 trillion and counting. The national debt, that is how much we owe our creditors, works out to an average of more than $130,000 per taxpayer. If you add in unfunded liabilities like Social Security, prescription drugs, and Medicare, it adds up to an unbelievable $1 million per taxpayer. Don't take my word for this. Look it up for yourself at usdebtclock.org. Our current national debt at just over 98% of GDP, our gross domestic product, is about equal to our total national yearly income. The interest on the debt, which is the rough equivalent to paying the minimum payment on your credit cards, is now the 5th largest item in the federal budget. There's a passage in the book of Revelation detailing the ride of what are known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The third rider on a black horse carries a pair of balances or a weight scale in his hand. The author of the book, the Apostle John, hears a cry, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." This prophecy is still a bit future, but the stage is now being set as I speak. A quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley are representative of a day's supply of food for a family. A denarius represents a day's wage in New Testament times. Oil and wine are symbols of great wealth. So what is predicted here is an economic situation in which it will take a day's wages for the average wage earner to buy a day's food for a small family. However, the rich will still be able to secure their gourmet food. This indicates that the shortage of food for the average person is not because of the lack of food supply, but because of a managed economic disaster. When the banking and investment houses began to fail in 2007 and 2008, the government covered all their losses with our money. That's what drove the current national deficit into the stratosphere. Now, the government is blaming the people to whom it gave your money for the economic tragedy unfolding on America's middle class. Regardless of the blame, The end result is clear. As the dollar erodes in value, everything will go up in price. Putting food on the table is already a growing problem among lower middle class families, and soon the only ones able to buy the better foods will be the wealthy, or the heads of new American Marxist proletariat. That is what the Apostle John had in mind when he wrote 2,000 years ago. It was still future in 1969, but in 2011, it's the only foreseeable future.